Okay, so ransomware. It's a big deal these days, and it seems like it's only getting worse. Like seriously, a 13% increase in attacks just
Yes.
in the last 5 years, and millions of attempts every single day. It's like a digital pandemic or something.
Yeah, it really is a constant cat and mouse game. As soon as we come up with new defenses, the attackers are already figuring out how to get around them. But that's why we're here today, to give you the knowledge you need to stay ahead of the game.
Exactly. We want to take a deep dive into the most common ways ransomware is delivered, so you can recognize the warning signs and protect yourself. Because if you understand how these attacks work, you're way less likely to become a victim.
It's kind of like learning self-defense, but for your data.
I like that analogy.
Hmm.
Okay, let's start with something that's been around for a while but is still super effective. Phishing emails. You know those messages that try to trick you into clicking a bad link or opening an infected attachment?
Phishing is like the first step into cybercrime. It often leads to something even more complex. And it works because it plays on human nature. We naturally want to trust people, especially if we see a logo we recognize or a message that seems really urgent.
Oh yeah, for sure. I remember getting one once. It looked exactly like it was from my bank, talking about some suspicious activity on my account. It even had the bank's logo and everything. I almost clicked the link, but then I noticed the sender's email address was a little bit off.
That's a perfect example of how sneaky these phishing emails can be. They're getting really good at making them look real, so you always have to double check everything, look closely at the sender's address, hover your mouse over links to see the actual URL, and be wary of generic greetings or anything that demands an immediate response.
Great advice. If you're ever unsure about an email, it's always better to be safe than sorry. So don't click anything until you're absolutely sure it's legit.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a lot easier to prevent an attack than it is to deal with the fallout afterwards.
Absolutely. For further information about how our appliances at Stonefly can protect you from these attacks, contact us at sales@stonefly.com or visit our website, www.stonefly.com. Now, speaking of being cautious, let's talk about malicious websites and drive-by downloads. This is a scary one because it means even visiting a legitimate website can be risky.
It's true. You don't even have to do anything wrong to become a victim. Hackers can compromise even well-known websites.
Hmm.
They inject malicious code into the site, which can then exploit vulnerabilities in your browser. And that can automatically download ransomware onto your system without you even clicking on anything. It's almost like a hidden trapdoor.
So it's not just those shady websites we have to worry about.
Not at all. Any website could be a target. So that's why having a multi-layered defense strategy is so important. Keeping your software up to date, using a good antivirus program, and enabling your browser's security features. All of that can really lower your risk. But you also need to be on the lookout for any signs that a website might be compromised. Things like unusual pop-ups, slow loading times, or strange URLs.
So it's kind of like having a spidey sense for shady websites.
Yeah, exactly. If something feels off about a website, it's probably best to trust your gut and get out of there.
Okay, let's move on to something a little more technical. Exploit kits.
Exploit kits are pretty sophisticated tools. They're like automated hacking toolboxes. They scan for vulnerabilities in your software, and then they use those weaknesses to deploy malware, including ransomware. What makes them so dangerous is their speed and adaptability. They can be updated incredibly quickly to target brand new vulnerabilities, sometimes within hours of the vulnerability being announced.
There's like a constant race against time to stay protected.
Exactly. That's why it's so crucial to patch those vulnerabilities as soon as possible. But it's also about having a comprehensive defense strategy. Things like endpoint protection, network segmentation, and regular security audits can all help reduce the risk of exploit kit attacks.
And speaking of defense in depth, our appliances at Stonefly are designed with multiple layers of security to keep you protected. To learn more about our appliances, contact us at sales@stonefly.com or visit our website, www.stonefly.com. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about RDP attacks, which exploit a tool that a lot of us use for remote work.
RDP stands for Remote Desktop Protocol, and it lets you access a computer remotely. It's super convenient, but it can also be a huge security risk if it's not properly secured. It's kind of like leaving the front door to your house wide open.
Yikes, that's not a good image. So how do these RDP attacks actually work?
Well, attackers often use brute force methods to guess passwords, or they exploit vulnerabilities in the RDP protocol itself. And once they get in, they basically have full control over your system. They can steal your data, install more malware, or even use your computer to launch further attacks.
So it's like giving them the keys to your entire digital kingdom.
Pretty much. That's why it's so important to lock down your RDP connections. Use strong, unique passwords, Enable multi-factor authentication. And regularly check your systems for any unauthorized access attempts.
So we've talked about phishing emails, malicious websites, exploit kits, and RDP attacks. It's all starting to sound pretty technical and complex. But what about the human element in all of this? How do attackers exploit our natural tendencies to trick us into letting our guard down?
Well, that's where social engineering comes in. It's all about manipulating people, playing on their emotions, their trust, their fears, to trick them into doing something that compromises security.
So it's not so much about hacking computers, it's more about hacking humans.
Exactly, and it can be incredibly effective. Think about those fake tech support calls. You know where someone claims to be from Microsoft, and they tell you your computer is infected, and they need remote access to fix it, or those emails that look like they're from a friend or colleague, asking you to click on a link.
Oh yeah, I've totally fallen for those before. Especially when I'm stressed or in a hurry. It's like they know exactly how to push our buttons.
That's the thing about social engineering. It preys on our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our willingness to help. And it doesn't always involve fancy technology. Sometimes it's as simple as someone calling your office, pretending to be a new employee, and asking for sensitive information.
So how can we protect ourselves from these social engineering scams?
Awareness is key. You need to educate yourself and your team about the different tactics that attackers use. Be suspicious of any unsolicited requests for information. Always verify someone's identity before sharing anything sensitive. And never click on links or open attachments from sources you don't recognize.
So basically, a healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to double-check things. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
All right, let's move on to another type of targeted attack, watering hole attacks. These sound a bit more ominous.
They're definitely strategic. Imagine a watering hole in the wild, where animals go to drink. In a watering hole attack, cybercriminals target websites that are popular with a specific group, like employees of a certain company or members of a particular industry. They compromise the website, often by injecting malicious code, and then they just wait for their victims to show up.
So it's like setting a trap where you know your targets will be.
Precisely. And it works because people tend to trust websites. They visit regularly. They assume those sites are safe, so they're less likely to be on guard.
Can you give us an example of a real-world watering hole attack?
Sure. Back in 2017, attackers went after the website of a popular cybersecurity forum, a forum that a lot of security researchers and professionals used. They hacked into the site and injected malware that stole sensitive data from visitors' computers. And because the forum was so well respected, many users got infected without even realizing it.
That's a scary thought. It just goes to show that even people who are knowledgeable about cybersecurity can still be vulnerable.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all need to be vigilant.
So how can we protect ourselves from these watering hole attacks?
Well, it can be tricky because you're essentially relying on the websites you visit to have good security. But there are some things you can do to minimize your risk. Use a reputable website reputation service. That can warn you about potentially compromised websites. Make sure your software is always up to date to patch any vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit. And of course, having a strong endpoint protection solution is essential, something that can detect and block malicious activity, even if you accidentally end up on a compromised website.
So it's all about layers of protection again.
Exactly. The more layers you have, the harder it is for attackers to get through.
All right, let's talk about our last ransomware delivery method for today. Infected software installers. I think we've all been there. You download what seems like a harmless program, only to find out later that it was full of malware.
It's a very common tactic because it plays on our desire for convenience and our trust in software providers. We assume that if we download a program from a well-known website or app store, it's going to be safe, but that's not always the case.
So how do attackers sneak their malicious code into these installers?
Well, there are a few different ways. Sometimes they hack into the software developer systems, and they inject the malware directly into the installer. Other times they create fake websites or app store listings that look completely legitimate, but they're actually distributing infected versions of popular programs.
So it's like a Trojan horse.
Exactly. And what's really scary is that these infected installers often look and act just like the real thing. You might not even realize you've been compromised until it's too late.
So what can we do to protect ourselves from infected software installers?
First of all, only download software from official and trustworthy sources. If you're downloading from a website, double-check that it's the actual website of the software provider. Look for a secure connection. You know, the HTTPS and the URL. And check for digital signatures. Those verify the authenticity of the installer. And always be wary of third-party download sites or peer-to-peer file sharing networks. Those can be breeding grounds for malware.
Okay, so be conscious and verify your sources.
Exactly. And of course, having a robust endpoint protection solution is critical. A good endpoint protection program can spot and block malicious code, even if it's hidden inside an installer.
And speaking of good protection, our appliances at Stonefly are designed to safeguard your data from ransomware and other threats. To learn more about what we offer, visit us at www.stonefly.com or contact our sales team directly at sales@stonefly.com. We've covered a lot of ground today. It's a bit overwhelming to think about all the ways attackers are trying to access our data.
I know it can be, but remember, knowledge is power. By understanding how these attacks work, we can be better prepared to defend ourselves.
I completely agree. Forewarned is forearmed, as they say. So let's quickly recap the 7 ransomware delivery methods we've talked about.
Sounds good.
First up, phishing emails. Those sneaky messages disguised to trick you into clicking bad links or opening infected attachments.
Then we talked about malicious websites and drive-by downloads, which take advantage of weaknesses in your browser to slip malware onto your computer without you knowing.
Next, we discussed exploit kits, those automated hacking tools that scan for vulnerabilities in your software and use them to deliver ransomware and other malware.
We also covered RDP attacks, which go after unsecured remote desktop protocol connections to gain control of your system.
And we talked about the dangers of social engineering, where attackers use manipulation to get people to compromise their own security.
We also looked at watering hole attacks, where cybercriminals target websites that are popular with specific groups and inject malware that infects unsuspecting visitors.
And finally, we discussed infected software installers, which hide ransomware and other malware within seemingly legitimate programs. Wow, that is a lot to remember. It feels like these attackers are probably finding new ways to trick us.
It's true, they are always innovating, but don't get discouraged. It's a constant back and forth. But if we stay informed and we're proactive, we can drastically reduce our risk.
I like that, staying proactive. It's not about being scared. It's about having the knowledge to protect ourselves.
Exactly. And remember, it's not all about technology. Strong cybersecurity needs both technical safeguards and human awareness.
I agree 100%. So what's the most important takeaway, the thing you really want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
I think the most crucial thing is to be aware of the threat. Ransomware is a serious and growing issue. It can happen to anyone. But if we understand how these attacks work, and we take steps to protect ourselves, we can seriously minimize our chances of becoming a victim.
Very well said. And remember, if you're looking for solid data protection solutions, we got you covered at Stonefly. Our appliances are built to keep your data safe from ransomware and other cyber threats. To learn more, just head over to our website at www.stonefly.com. Or you can reach out to our sales team directly at sales@stonefly.com.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of ransomware delivery methods. Stay safe out there.